In the heart of West Africa, where the sun casts long shadows over a land scarred by conflict and struggle, a new chapter was about to be written. Burkina Faso, a country battered by years of unrest and violence, found itself standing on the precipice of change. But as the winds of hope blew through the streets of Ouagadougou, dark forces lurked in the shadows, waiting for their chance to strike. Ouagadougou, June 2024. The dry season's heat scorched the red dirt roads, but the city buzzed with a rare kind of energy. Banners stretched across intersections read, "One nation, one future, one leader." President Ibrahim Traoré's face was everywhere, on walls, newspapers, and cheaply made baseball caps sold at the local markets. People whispered in hopeful tones, believing that a new era for Burkina Faso was finally within reach. Since taking power after the September 2022 coup, Traoré had led the transitional government with an iron sense of purpose. When he officially announced he would not run in the upcoming July 2024 elections, citing his role only as a guardian of the transition, public admiration swelled. Ironically, his refusal to cling to power made him all the more beloved. But admiration alone was never a guarantee of safety. Hidden behind closed doors and shaded balconies, shadowy figures watched his every move. A faction within the military council, secretly aligned with warlords and foreign corporate interests, saw Traoré as a threat to their long-term ambitions. To them, a civilian government, even a temporary one, was intolerable. On the evening of June 10th, as President Traoré met behind closed doors with representatives from the African Union and civic leaders, a man was caught sneaking into a high-security military compound adjacent to the presidential residence. He carried no weapons, no ID, no digital footprint. All he had in his pocket was a blood-stained piece of paper folded into quarters. On it, a single line was scrawled in shaky French, "Do not let the light rise." The incident never made the news. Security was quietly tripled around Traoré, and though the president's public demeanor remained unchanged, his close advisors noticed a deepening stillness in him. He had smelled the scent of ambushes before in the jungles, in the deserts, during the resistance, and he could smell it now. Still, he said nothing, not to his generals, not to the press. Instead, on June 14th, he announced a high-profile visit to Ouagadougou, a former jihadist stronghold recently reclaimed by national forces. He would go there not just to inspect, but to speak, to reassure citizens of his unwavering commitment to national unity and reconciliation. Behind the curtains of power, murmurs began. He shouldn't go, not there, not now. Somewhere, someone began counting down the hours. 3 days before President Traoré's scheduled trip to Ouagadougou, a pale yellow envelope mysteriously appeared on the desk of Lieutenant Colonel Yakuba Zongo, head of the Presidential Guard. No stamp, no return address. It had been hand-delivered, yet none of the guards at the gate recalled seeing who had dropped it off. The envelope felt oddly warm in his hands, as if it carried more than just paper. Zongo, ever cautious and hardened by years of field duty, sliced it open with his service knife. Inside, a single photograph emerged, grainy, black and white, clearly taken from a distance. It depicted President Traoré in the barracks courtyard 2 nights prior, casually sipping tea with 3 senior commanders. But in the background, circled in red ink, stood a blurred figure near a military jeep. Someone who didn't belong. Alongside the photograph was a small note, hastily scribbled in smudged black ink. "The next time he drinks tea, it will be blood." Zongo stared at it in silence. His pulse quickened. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the message was unmistakable. That night, he didn't sleep. He reviewed personnel rosters, security footage, and background checks until dawn crept in through the barracks windows. By morning, security protocols were escalated. All staff assigned to the Ouagadougou trip were revetted. But just as measures were reinforced, new problems began to emerge. The presidential satellite links failed a routine check. The convoy's armored trucks were delayed in customs without explanation. A routine inspection of Traoré's helicopter revealed tampering with the navigation system, subtle enough to be missed by an ordinary eye. To make matters worse, a foreign journalist embedded with a UN peacekeeping unit contacted Traoré's press office. She claimed to possess audio recordings suggesting a conspiracy at the highest level, names, dates, voices. She requested an interview with the president. Her request was denied. Publicly, Traoré maintained his calm, but in private he reread the blood-marked warning from days before. "Do not let the light rise." It echoed now not as a threat, but as a prophecy. June 17th, dawn. The presidential motorcade rolled out of Ouagadougou under tight surveillance, with a convoy of black SUVs flanked by military trucks. The road to Ouagadougou was long and dusty, flanked by acacia trees and scattered villages still bearing scars from insurgent attacks. President Traoré sat in the lead vehicle, eyes fixed on the horizon, his thoughts unreadable. Inside his vehicle, the atmosphere was tense. Zongo sat across from him, hand resting on his holstered sidearm, scanning every passing figure and roadside stand with a soldier's paranoia. Drones hovered overhead. Ground units swept ahead, reporting all clear. Still, everyone felt the weight of the unknown pressing in. Midway through the journey, the convoy encountered an unexpected delay. A herd of cattle had blocked the narrow road through a village. The local herders claimed it was coincidence, but Zongo noticed that one man, dressed like the others, wore boots too new for his surroundings, and he was carrying a sat phone. The man vanished moments later. They moved on, but the air felt heavier. Every hour brought them closer to Ouagadougou and to something no one could quite name. As they approached the outskirts of the city, the welcome banners waved in the hot wind. The streets were lined with people cheering, holding signs of peace. But Zongo saw it. Behind the smiles, behind the music, shadows moved, and at least one of them wasn't there to welcome the president. The ceremony stage in Ouagadougou had been set with military precision. National flags fluttered on all sides, and a long crimson carpet stretched to the raised podium. The perimeter had been secured for hours, snipers on rooftops, armored units patrolling the perimeter, and facial scans for every guest. It was, on paper, impenetrable, but there is no such thing as perfection in war. As President Traoré stepped out of his vehicle, a wave of cheers surged through the crowd. He nodded solemnly, shaking hands, walking the carpet toward the microphone beneath a canopy of sun and anticipation. Zongo stayed close, earpiece humming with quiet static as his eyes scanned every movement. Something was off. The local police unit assigned to the western gate hadn't checked in. He radioed them. No reply. Then the power surged, just a flicker, but enough. The speakers gave a brief pop, and for half a second the stage lights dimmed. In that moment, Zongo's eyes caught it. A glint of metal in the third row of dignitaries, someone raising a hand not to clap, but to aim. Zongo moved before the thought could even form, pushing Traoré off his path just as a loud crack echoed across the square. Panic erupted. People screamed. Soldiers raised weapons. But the shooter was already moving, through a gap that should have been sealed, a blind spot in the security ring. He wore the badge of a regional security officer. As chaos engulfed the scene, Traoré struggled to rise, his left arm bleeding. "I'm fine," he muttered through clenched teeth. But Zongo knew better. The wound was deep. And somewhere beyond the stage, the real enemy was walking calmly away, toward a black vehicle with no plates. Something had broken, not just the security ring, but the illusion that anyone, even a war-hardened president, could escape betrayal when it came from within. The gunfire lasted only seconds, but the silence that followed lingered like a storm cloud. As the crowd scattered, security forces swept the square with mechanical urgency. Dignitaries were rushed to safety. Civilians took cover behind vendor stalls. The red carpet was now soaked in something far darker than ceremony. Zongo dragged Traoré behind the reinforced podium, pressing gauze against the wound. The bullet had torn through the president's shoulder, dangerously close to the collarbone. Traoré gritted his teeth, refusing painkillers, his voice strained. "Don't call for evacuation, not yet." But the real danger wasn't the bleeding. It was the signal that never came. The emergency response protocol had failed. The encrypted radio line, meant to link local command with the capital, remained dead. Someone had severed communications. A second vehicle exploded near the convoy parking lot. It wasn't meant to kill. It was meant to scatter. In the confusion, a man in fatigues and dark glasses emerged from the debris smoke, walking calmly. Too calmly. He approached a communications van. A technician noticed too late. By the time Zongo's men intercepted the stranger, he had already disabled the backup satellite relay. He did not resist arrest. In fact, he smiled. "The first shot was just to wake you," he said in calm French. "The second one comes when you sleep." News of the attack broke through social media before the government could issue a statement. Images of a bleeding Traoré being escorted from the stage flooded the internet. In Ouagadougou, rumors flew like wildfire. Some claimed he was dead. Others said he had fled the country. Ministers convened behind locked doors. And on the streets, fear returned. For a nation just beginning to hope again, the silence after the shot was more terrifying than the shot itself. The arrested saboteur gave no name, no rank, no demand. Just that one sentence, cryptic and cold. He was taken to an undisclosed facility outside of Ouagadougou for interrogation. Inside a soundproof room lined with cinder blocks, Zongo watched him through a pane of mirrored glass. The man neither blinked nor asked for water. He only smiled. 2 interrogators tried to break him: psychological pressure, silent treatment, even sensory deprivation. Nothing worked. But when shown a photograph of President Traoré recovering in a safe house, the man finally spoke again. "It doesn't matter. He won't be alive by sunrise." Meanwhile, in the hidden mountain villa where Traoré was receiving emergency care, a skeleton medical team stitched his wound by candlelight. No electronics, no radio. Every form of digital contact had been blacked out. The safest place for the president now was silence. Zongo arrived at the safe house just before midnight, dirt still on his boots and a pistol on his belt. He knelt beside Traoré's cot. The president's face was pale but calm. "You should have evacuated me," he whispered. Zongo shook his head. "If I had, they would have filmed it. They want you to look weak." Traoré closed his eyes. "They want the idea of me dead, not just the man." Outside the villa, clouds gathered. In Ouagadougou, military checkpoints multiplied overnight. Tanks lined the boulevard. Cabinet ministers received encrypted messages, some threatening, others begging for a power shift. But no one knew who was sending them. By dawn, it was clear. The bullet hadn't just pierced flesh. It had shattered something deeper: trust. In the weeks following the attack, Ibrahim Traoré's health improved. But the political landscape of Burkina Faso grew more turbulent with every passing day. While the president recuperated in a secret location, the country faced increasing uncertainty. Rumors of sabotage and conspiracy ran rampant through the corridors of power. Everyone, from high-ranking officials to local government representatives, seemed to be asking the same question: who was behind this attempt on the president's life? Zongo, the president's most loyal and trusted aide, was tasked with investigating the conspiracy. He began to piece together the fragments of information he had gathered during the chaos. The sniper's bullet, though a deadly message, had been only part of a larger, more calculated plan. The technician who had been killed while trying to repair the satellite relay had left behind crucial clues, enough to indicate that this wasn't a lone wolf operation. Zongo's investigation led him into the heart of the administration, and he quickly discovered that there were more figures involved than anyone could have imagined. One name kept cropping up in his search: General T, a highly decorated officer in the military. Known for his charisma and influence, General T was often considered the true power behind the throne of Burkina Faso's leadership. But his motives were unclear. Could he be orchestrating a coup? The deeper Zongo delved into General T's affairs, the more he began to realize that the general had been operating in the shadows, manipulating events for his own gain. High-level meetings, strategic military movements, and even financial deals all seemed to tie back to him. But what was his end game? One evening, Zongo received a message from an anonymous informant. The source claimed to have critical information about General T's involvement in the plot, but only on one condition. Zongo had to meet him in person, outside the capital, under the cover of darkness. As the night fell over Ouagadougou, Zongo made his way to the designated meeting spot. The city seemed eerily quiet, the usual hum of activity muted by the weight of the ongoing political crisis. When he arrived, the informant was already there, hidden in the shadows. "Zongo," the man's voice whispered, "you're on the right path, but you've underestimated the one you trust most." Before Zongo could respond, the man vanished into the night, leaving behind a cold, lingering sense of dread. Now, with this new information in hand, Zongo was faced with a horrifying realization. The figure pulling the strings was closer than he ever imagined. Someone in his very circle, someone who Traoré had trusted, was orchestrating this entire scheme. As he pondered the depth of this betrayal, Zongo knew one thing for sure. The fight for Burkina Faso's future was far from over. The true enemy, hidden in plain sight, was just beginning to reveal himself. The following days were filled with tension and uncertainty. Zongo's investigation had reached a critical point, but the stakes had risen. The realization that there were deeper forces at play, operating behind closed doors, sent a chill through his spine. It was no longer a question of who was behind the assassination attempt, it was how far the corruption and conspiracy reached. Zongo had never felt more alone. As the political unrest within the country worsened, his own team, once so united in their loyalty to Traoré, seemed increasingly divided. His conversations with other high-ranking officials were clouded with suspicion, and he could see the doubt in their eyes whenever he mentioned General T's name. The once untouchable general, whose authority had seemed so absolute, now appeared to be the centerpiece of a much larger, covert operation. The informant's warning echoed in Zongo's mind. The figure pulling the strings was closer than he ever imagined. Zongo's immediate suspicion had fallen on the high-ranking officers surrounding Traoré, particularly those with direct access to the president's schedule and inner circle. But what he hadn't anticipated was the web of deceit stretching far beyond the military. The network of betrayal wasn't just within the armed forces. It spanned all sectors of government, business, and even the media. Zongo began tracking financial transactions, looking for unusual patterns that could point to a hidden hand manipulating events. He found evidence of multiple accounts, tied to offshore banks, funneling large sums of money into the hands of people he thought he could trust. Through back channels, Zongo managed to track down one of these investors, a prominent businessman who had long held influence in both the private and public sectors. But when Zongo confronted him, the man was more forthcoming than Zongo had expected. General T is only a small part of the puzzle, the businessman confessed, his voice laced with fear. The businessman's words sent a shock through Zongo. This was no longer just an internal power struggle, it was a global game of chess, and Burkina Faso was the pawn. Zongo spent the next few weeks tracing the flow of information, carefully building a case against General T and the international syndicate he had apparently aligned himself with. The more he uncovered, the more his heart sank. The web of treason was far deeper than he had imagined. His own country, already reeling from years of conflict, had become a pawn in a much larger geopolitical struggle. But as Zongo neared the truth, he realized that this battle was no longer just about finding the conspirators. It was about saving the soul of Burkina Faso itself. If he failed, the country would fall into the hands of those who sought only to use its people as leverage in their global ambitions. In his final meeting with Traoré, Zongo spoke in low tones, his voice filled with urgency. "Sir, we're not just fighting for power here. This is a war for the future of our nation, and the enemy is everywhere. We have to act fast before it's too late." Traoré, still recovering from the earlier attack, nodded solemnly. His eyes were sharp, filled with the weight of the truth. "Then let's end this, Zongo, whatever it takes." The walls of the capital were closing in, and the tension in the air was palpable. Zongo knew the truth now. Burkina Faso's government was riddled with corruption, and the very institutions that were supposed to protect the country had been compromised. But there was one thing Zongo hadn't fully anticipated: the incredible resilience of Ibrahim Traoré. Even in the midst of all the turmoil, the president had remained steadfast. His wound had healed, though his body still bore the scars of the attack. His resolve, however, was unbroken. He knew that his survival wasn't just a matter of fate, it was a call to arms. The stakes had never been higher, and the countdown to a final confrontation had begun. The country was teetering on the brink of collapse. Reports of insurgencies in the north had intensified, and the chaos threatened to engulf the nation. International powers were circling, sensing an opportunity to gain a foothold in the region. But Traoré, despite everything, was determined to keep Burkina Faso free of foreign influence. He refused to let the country be another pawn in the global game of power. Zongo's investigation had revealed a network of traitors, both inside and outside the country, conspiring to manipulate the country's fate. However, it was the information he had recently uncovered that truly shook him to the core, a plan for the assassination of not just Traoré, but an entire faction of the government. A shadowy group, once thought to be disbanded, had revived itself with a singular goal: to overthrow the president and plunge Burkina Faso back into chaos. But Zongo also learned something more surprising. The man behind the plot, someone thought to be loyal to Traoré, was in fact his most trusted ally. It was a double betrayal that sent shockwaves through the very core of Zongo's understanding of loyalty. The name came as a gut punch: Major Diarra. The man who had stood by Ibrahim's side, who had fought in every battle, who had promised to protect him, was the very one orchestrating the final blow. It was Diarra who had been passing on crucial information to the enemies of the state, leaking intelligence that could have cost Traoré his life. Diarra's ambition had led him down a dark path, one that would see the downfall of his own country if left unchecked. Zongo's next move was clear. He had to act swiftly before Diarra's plot could come to fruition. He quickly gathered a small, trusted group of soldiers, loyal to Traoré above all else, and prepared for a final, decisive mission. It was not just about taking down Diarra. It was about saving the very heart of Burkina Faso from being torn apart by betrayal. As the team moved under the cover of darkness, Zongo couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. This wasn't just about protecting a leader. It was about preserving the future of a nation on the brink of destruction. The operation would require precision, stealth, and, above all, courage. The night was heavy with anticipation as Zongo's team neared Diarra's hideout, a nondescript compound tucked away on the outskirts of the city. The air was thick with tension, the hum of distant voices, and the occasional sound of footsteps echoing through the darkened streets. As they approached the compound, Zongo gave a silent nod to his team, signaling the final phase of their mission. They breached the compound swiftly, moving like shadows through the night. It didn't take long before they located Diarra, sitting at a desk alone, as if waiting for the inevitable confrontation. Zongo stood at the doorway, watching him for a moment before stepping into the room. "You've betrayed us all, Diarra," Zongo said, his voice cold and unwavering. Diarra didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled, a bitter, hollow smile. "You think you can stop what's already been set in motion?" Zongo's hand tightened around the grip of his weapon. He had no more time for words. The future of Burkina Faso depended on ending this here and now. As he took a step forward, Zongo knew that this was the last stand. The path ahead would be one of redemption or ruin, and only one of them would walk away. The confrontation with Major Diarra was over in mere seconds. A single shot rang through the night, silencing the traitor's bitter smile forever. Zongo stood over him, the weight of what he had just done settling heavily on his shoulders. The battle for Burkina Faso had reached its most crucial moment, and he knew that there would be no turning back. With Diarra's death, the conspiracy to assassinate Traoré was dismantled, but the larger war was far from over. Burkina Faso was teetering on the edge of collapse, torn between the forces of internal betrayal and external powers eager to exploit its instability. The coup had failed, but the real test of survival was only just beginning. Zongo's mind raced. The shadowy figures who had backed Diarra were still out there, their interests far more extensive than just one man's betrayal. They had infiltrated the military, the government, and the very fabric of the nation. But Zongo knew there was one person who could lead the charge to restore order: Ibrahim Traoré. It was time to make a decision, one that would define the future of Burkina Faso. Zongo had been loyal to Traoré from the very beginning, but now, more than ever, he had to ask himself what his loyalty truly meant. Was it to the man, or was it to the vision of a free and independent Burkina Faso? In a darkened room, Zongo stood before Traoré, who was now fully recovered from his wound. His eyes were as sharp as ever, and his presence radiated a quiet strength. The president knew what had transpired. He knew of the plot, of Diarra's betrayal, and of Zongo's role in exposing it. But there was no time for gratitude. The future of the nation was at stake, and the decision to act must be made now. "Zongo," Traoré said, his voice steady, "the time has come. The forces behind this plot, the ones who seek to tear this country apart, are still out there. They will not stop until they have what they want." Zongo nodded, understanding the gravity of the moment. The decision to confront these shadowy figures head-on was not one he made lightly. But in the depths of his heart, he knew that only one thing could save Burkina Faso now: a return to strength, unity, and sovereignty. "Then we must finish what we started, sir," Zongo replied, his voice firm. "We will bring the fight to them." In the days that followed, a series of carefully orchestrated strikes began across the country. The hidden cells of betrayal were rooted out, one by one, as Traoré and Zongo moved decisively against the forces threatening to destabilize the nation. The military's loyalty was tested, but with every successful operation, more and more troops rallied behind Traoré's leadership. The world watched as the president of Burkina Faso, a man who had once been seen as an outsider, emerged as a symbol of resilience and defiance. The forces of corruption and foreign influence had underestimated him, and now they were being swept aside. But despite the successes, the true battle was not just one of military might, it was one of the heart and soul of Burkina Faso. Would the people rise with Traoré, or would they falter under the weight of the years of violence and betrayal? The next few months would decide. As the dust began to settle, Traoré addressed the nation. Standing before thousands of citizens, he spoke not just as a leader, but as a man who had fought for the very survival of his people. "This is not just about me," he said, his voice carrying across the crowd. "This is about all of us, our future, our sovereignty, and our dignity. We will not be pawns in anyone's game. We will rebuild stronger than ever." The applause was deafening. People from all walks of life, once divided by fear and suspicion, now stood united in their support for Traoré and his vision. The blood that had been spilled, the betrayals that had shaken the foundation of the nation, it was all worth it. Burkina Faso was at a crossroads, and the people had chosen their path. Zongo, standing at Traoré's side, felt a sense of fulfillment he had never known. They had won, but the fight for the future was ongoing. As long as he and Traoré stood together, as long as they had the strength to resist, Burkina Faso would not fall. For the first time in a long while, there was hope. And that hope would carry them through the darkest times yet to come. The dust of battle has settled, but the war is far from over. Burkina Faso stands at a crossroads, its future uncertain but filled with the possibility of renewal. With the strength of its people and the unwavering determination of their president, Ibrahim Traoré, the country has taken its first steps toward recovery. But the journey ahead will be long and fraught with challenges.